Thanks so much, Marianne and Cara, for the introduction and the invitation to speak, and very happy to roll with things. Flexibility and adaptability is one of the key principles of any co-design process, so very happy to go with that. I'm just going to get my slides up and just checking that you can see them okay. Yes? Okay. So what I'm going to be talking about today is our project, which is a current collaboration that has been going for the last 5 years on the Olkola Cultural Knowledge Centre. It's a design and building project. And so it's a little bit different from a health specific project. However, I think the principles that underpin it are very relevant and transferable to any project that you might be embarking on where you're thinking about co-production of knowledge and outcomes. But before I go on, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the country that I'm located on. I'm situated on Wurundjeri land today, and I'd like to acknowledge their elders, past, present, and emerging. But I'd also like to acknowledge the co-authorship with the Olkola traditional owners for all aspects of this project that I'm going to be speaking about today. This is a picture here of Sandy Creek Bore, which is the site that we are building the Cultural Knowledge Centre on prior to construction beginning. Before I go on, I think it's really important to situate the context that the work that I'm doing is situated in. Building in remote regions is a really big challenge. The small populations that exist in those places mean that there's a limited political ability to advocate for needs. There's a limited local market in terms of availability of materials and resources by the nature of the small populations that are there. There are long distances to market as well, and this means that it increases transportation costs and embodied energy. And it's difficult to access like the places themselves. Some of these places are cut off for like 6 months of the year due to wet seasons, which limits your timeframes and opportunities to build. And there are also high maintenance and repair costs. Now, that's just remote regions in general, but when we look at Indigenous land and building on Indigenous land in remote regions, the challenges become more complex. So Indigenous land is held in collective and alienable title, which means it can't be bought or sold, and it's owned by a collective group who are the traditional owners of that land. As a result, it's impossible to have a fungibility of that asset that you build on that land. So you can't borrow money from a bank to build in the way that you might in an urban or regional setting where there isn't recognised Indigenous land tenure. And as a result, it demands another way of doing things. And this other way of doing things might be something like an Indigenous community-led approach. So we saw in Erin's presentation the IAP2 spectrum of participation, and it went up to empower, but I would say that maybe the work that we're doing and the way that we go about it is situated is actually beyond the empower process. It's in an Indigenous-led sphere where community determine not only the decision-making throughout the project, but they actually determine what the project is about at the beginning. They guide the decision-making processes and how they'll happen, including private cultural decision-making processes where I'm not even privy to the decisions that are being made in those settings. And it occurs in line with traditional decision-making processes that ensure that all the clans are on board, that there's cultural clearances and so on. And it ensures as well that the Indigenous community that we partner with own the process throughout each stage. So instead of being a traditional architecture role or a community construction role where you're coming up with the concept and trying to bring people on board in a more of a consultation or a collaborative approach, my role becomes one of facilitation, technical advice, project coordination, and management. And there are a set of design principles that really underpin this approach. It's enabled through listening, allowing, and staging, but the project itself is underpinned by a shared vision. And there are 4 key parts that contribute to working towards this shared vision. Participation being a key one, partnerships being one that enables us to access the services required to ensure that we can achieve our project. Contextual responsivity refers to being place-based and responding to the specific challenges of this particular remote location, and adaptability being another one, about responding to things as they arise. To get an understanding of where we're talking about, Olkola country is situated in central Cape York, and you can sort of see the location of Sandy Creek there. And we are building this cultural knowledge centre there. And for the Olkola people, it's a place to bring everything together. It's a place for cultural tourism. It's a place for ranger activities. It's a place for combining contemporary scientific research with traditional Indigenous knowledge and bringing those two together to create, a really unique form of land management. And it's also a place for repatriating cultural artifacts and archives and exhibiting them in this space. So it's a 3-stage project, and I'm showing you a pretty boring site plan here, but you can see that at stage 1 prototype, which is under construction at the moment, nearing completion in the next month or two. Stage 2, which is a ranger base on the other side, we've just been approved funding a couple of months ago from the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation to build that one next year. And stage 3, which we're seeking funding for, which is to complete the cultural centre, which will include the exhibition spaces and the archival areas. I should also state that this is like an completely off-grid project. So it's required setting up power and water access, Wi-Fi, all of the services and everything we have on site, water collection and water treatment and everything like that. So that's all part of our first stage, as well as establishing those services. But to begin, the very first step is about listening first and identifying needs. Before I met Olkola, they had already written a brief about what they wanted their cultural centre to be. And it was driven by the vision of Uncle Mike Ross, who's pictured here. And that was a vision to bring all of their knowledge together. And you can see that beautiful quote from Uncle Mike there, articulating that vision. One of the first steps was about getting up on country. And when I was working at Monash I just finished a PhD and just started my first academic position, I funded myself to go up there and just sit down and listen to what was happening and what this vision for the cultural centre was. This is sitting at Sandy Creek Bore. You can see it's quite a different photo from that first one I showed. It was towards the end of the dry season. And Uncle Mike drew the vision for the cultural centre in the sand. He also drew out a plan around how we could start this process. And we talked about the idea of a master plan being the first step. And he said it would be really great if we could make those master plans films so that I can share them with our other traditional owners. And in that way, we can share this idea and this vision broadly, but we can also potentially show funders. And so from that, I had no funding or anything at that point, but I did have a studio group that I was working with in the architecture department there, and was able to involve a group of students on that first project, which was to do a master plan, and the assessment task became a film. And from that, these films came, there was 3 different groups all working together, and they went up on country and collaboratively designed based on a conversation and a yarn with Uncle Mike, where he drew the plan for this. It's been a staged process throughout as well. And initially it started with these design studios, and there was one with the summer elective. There was another one that continued once that master planning went well, where we then looked at developing a detailed design. And then the following semester, it was quite clear that we needed to bring in other disciplines to maybe realise this project as something that could be built. And so we partnered with the final year capstone unit when I was at Monash as well, that involved over 320 civil engineering students. And they had a Master of Architecture. They worked in groups of 5 and had a Master of Architecture student as a mentor to help guide them through a design process. And whilst this was happening, we were engaging with the traditional owners on country and via Zoom and through multiple different methods constantly throughout the process. And during the capstone unit, there was an internal decision-making process by Olkola around which design scheme they wanted to go with. And they actually brought together, from the 16 design schemes that they'd been presented, a number of different ideas that they'd taken from several of them that we then brought together in the one design scheme. So the key kind of principles that have underpinned this process are allowing time for participatory design to occur. And that means allowing time for the relationships to develop, allowing time for different settings for collaborative design tasks to take place. And that has included things like formal design workshops where you sit around with butcher's paper and do your stereotypical co-design tasks. It's also included things like sitting down on country, like in this photo, and hearing yarns and stories about those particular places on country and having that woven into the designs. It's about the opportunities for Olkola to come down onto university country, as we call it, as coming down to partner with us, and that two-way knowledge exchange occurring throughout the partnership. Allowing time for decision-making is also a really important part. This is the design scheme by Lauren French, who's one of the students who was involved, which was chosen as the primary design scheme to move forward. It's obviously evolved significantly since then, but it was a rammed earth scheme, and Lauren went up on country and was really interested in exploring how you could use what was available on country, and that's also been something that's a focus of the research that I do. But she involved the traditional owners in making prototypes of these rammed earth and working with this, and that actually brought people along on the journey of thinking this is actually something we'd really like to build with. And now it's something that's really owned by Olkola as being, not only are we building a cultural centre on country, but it's built on Olkola country with Olkola country, and that's the way it's described by the traditional owners involved. The stage design process has continued, and since 2020, it's moved away from, I guess, well, it's still continued to involve students, but it's also moved into involving an extensive volunteer network. Primarily, this began from students who became graduates who still wanted to be involved in the project. And then it's formed into more formal partnerships. So a number of the graduate engineers were working at Arup, a pretty prominent international engineering firm. And that has then led on to a significant relationship with Arup, who at this date have contributed over $323,000 worth of both paid and in-kind services through a team of their people being involved in the engineering design. The architecture volunteering has remained more organic in a sense and informal, but that has also seen the full architectural design of this project come together. And we continue to finalise at the moment the range-based documentation for building permit submission. So another key part of this is about allowing time for including local people in the construction. And originally this was envisaged to be a self-build, which is, I guess, the most participatory form of building as well, self-built by the Olkola Rangers. But we realised that with the scale of the building and what we were doing and the way we were building and what Olkola wanted, that wasn't really going to be possible for their rangers who also have full-time jobs to do that. So it was reconsidered about how they would be involved, and the rangers have done everything they can other than the actual built works. So they've done all of the site establishment, the site fencing, establishing the site office, helping install the solar, doing the bore, all of these parts of the work as well. So we've just rethought how we can do it. It's involved development of new local construction material systems, including earth and timber, and you can see the timber here. And it's allowed for growth as well of building systems. So when we sought funding for the first stage, for the prototype, we also sought funding for the stage 3 footing, so that when we could bring other Olkola traditional owners up on country or potential funders, they would be able to see and envisage that third stage in place. And this also means that we are able to celebrate the small wins along the way, which are really important for sustaining involvement in the project throughout. So with the completion of the prototype, we are able to actively use that part of the building while still then seeking funding for the next stages. We also have to allow for growth of partnerships. So it began when I was at Monash, and then there's another project that involves several faculties there, and then has moved to Melbourne Uni, but it also involves there's another project that also involves several faculties there that has come out of this project, which looks at digital storytelling and repatriation. But there's at the core this partnership between Olkola, the university, and Centre for Appropriate Technology. And then we've also looking at establishing further industry collaborations, as well as our one to Arup, and a number of them are under works at the moment with architecture firms and potentially construction firms as well for project management support. And we see this as being an ecosystem model that is something that could be replicated by other traditional owners, and Olkola are really encouraging of other traditional owners to learn from the way that they've gone about this, to apply it in their context for what they would like to build on their country. And the ultimate objective is about building sustainable livelihoods on country that in turn enable people to live back on country. So where are we now? Well, this was taken back in June when we took the volunteers up on country. This trip was originally scheduled for 2021, but lockdowns prevented us from doing that. 2022, I had a baby, and so we weren't able to go up there then. And then 2023, finally, the group were able to get up there. The people that you see in this photo, 80% of them were originally students, other than the Olkola people, were originally students on this project and have been involved in the project for 4 to 5 years. But some of them, including Rob, the tall guy situated next to me, was never involved in a student, but has become involved at a later date because it aligns with his values. And I think values is a really important thing about this project. I think the other thing that's really important is about allowing time for voluntary input. When you're relying on volunteers, things take time and things don't necessarily get resolved to the point that they would if you were working in a mainstream firm. So this is a drawing I did yesterday or the day before about an issue we're having with the roller door not being resolved. And this has become a problem with the prototype, and why breaking it down into stages has been so useful, because in working with recent graduates and a big team of people as well, it's been hard at times to get the full oversight of all aspects of the project. So a lot of this is iterative at every point, even right down to when we're building it as well. But underpinning the challenges that come with that is this wealth of meaning and values that I think are really rich. So in terms of meaning, we're actually currently writing a paper, and it's going to be for the co-design journal, but some of the emergent findings that are coming out of interviewing our team are that the meanings that they ascribe to the project, that it's worthwhile, that there's a deep cultural meaning for Olkola, there's a sense of personal satisfaction for them in terms of their involvement. It's about a two-way knowledge exchange, there's social value, a sense of purpose, a sense that it's a real project, connection with the community. It's another way of doing practice. It enables them to use their professional skills in a way that aligns with their values. And I think the quotes that you see on the right also really encapsulate this meaning. So the top one there is from Catherine Samuel, who's a project manager as well on the project, and an Olkola woman who works at the Olkola Aboriginal Corporation. And so she talks about how even though she's doing her best in project management, in the project, it's also about contributing to the work of all the Olkola people. And I'm helping realize Grandad Mike's vision. It's special to me because I always have dreams about wanting to just go and live in country and escape Cairns and the big city life. And that deep cultural meaning that underpins this is really important. And for the volunteers, it's about all the other values that are ascribed in that. So it's so unique, and it's certainly not every day you get to work on a project located so remotely and with such an emphasis on local knowledge, local materials, and for the purpose of sharing culture with future generations and tourists. And that's a quote from Edie, who is a former student of the engineering cohort who's been involved since 2019. The values that underpin the project are that it's culturally appropriate. This is what the team have come up with through the interviews, that it's culturally appropriate, that it supports connections to country, that there's a real emphasis on collaboration, teamwork, and partnership, that it's about bringing like-minded people around a shared vision, that it's inclusive, that people value different contributions in the team, that there's a sense of fun, community, and energy in the project, that it provides two-way benefits, and that there's a sense of care, and that it's rare. And I noticed that this is repeating some of the other values and principles that previous speakers have already spoken about today as well. But I think what's really important about sharing these values as well is that I've often wondered why these volunteers have been involved for such a long term, in such a long-term way. I mean, now for many of them, it's been 4 or 5 years. And in checking in and sense checking during this data collection process, we've checked about how they want to stay involved, and they all want to continue being involved as well. We're talking about a group of about 30 people, including Olkola traditional owners, as well as the architecture volunteer team and the engineering volunteer team, and it's growing as well. And I think it is about everybody working behind this collective common goal and feeling valued in that process as well. So this is a drawing that came out of a conversation I had with Uncle Mike and Deb recently when we were asked to be keynotes at an Indigenous Knowledge Institute symposium. And Olkola talked about where they come from, where they are now, and where they're going. And I think this drawing, and I translated it into a drawing on the basis of what Uncle Mike was talking about, and then checked with him as to whether this reflected what he meant. But I think this is an important part of this co-design process. It's constant, it continues, and it continues into other projects that we're working on together. But really what it comes back to is about enabling Olkola people to connect back with their country, to connect back with the old world, but also bring the best parts of this new world of contemporary science and so forth, so that those two worlds can continue to walk alongside together. And we're really committed to continuing to partner and supporting Olkola in achieving their vision to do that. So at the core of this, it's people. This is 5 years ago. This is when we were up on Olkola country, undertaking a detailed participatory design process for the detailed architectural design. You can see the Olkola traditional owners in the photo, but most of the other people in this photo are student group at that time. But 5 years on, it's changed, and most of the people that are involved now, you can see there's a large group of Olkola people involved, and there's a number of familiar faces there, but there's also further faces that have come along on the journey. So it's a very inclusive process, but it really is about the collective effort of a really large group of people. So thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to share our journey along the way, and I really welcome any questions you have about how we've gone about this.